But we're going to be looking at Numbers chapter. Well, just turn to the book of Numbers. We're going to go through a lot of it, but we're going to go through it quickly because I want to give you guys a summary. Obviously, up until now, we've gone from the Exodus of Egypt when the Israelites were rescued from slavery and from bondage. And we looked at the crossing of the Red Sea when God miraculously brought the people out of Egypt and rescued them from their slavery, which represents the sin that we are rescued from as God's people. And then he led them by a cloud to a beach, and of course they were trapped, and he led them through the Red Sea. And then on the other side, they rejoiced as they watched their sin defeated by the Red Sea. But then it wasn't long before many of the people began to grumble and complain, as you maybe would expect, because they didn't have any water, right? But rather than have faith, rather than ask and say, Lord, we need this, they rather shook their fist in his face and said, were there no graves in Egypt that you brought us out here to die in the desert? And God's anger was kindled against them for that. But even in his anger, he found mercy, and Moses struck the rock, and water came out, which is a parable of Christ being struck on the cross, being struck, being pierced, and being crucified for our sin. And then he is now the living water that gives us all life. And of course, from there, they went around to Mount Sinai, which is where Moses met with God, and he gave them the law. He gave them the 10 Commandments. And then he even gave them, on top of that, the Levitical laws and the ceremonial and the priestly and all the different laws. And we learned that Levitical priesthood, that law that God gave the Israelites at Mount Sinai, he gave them not as a blessing, but as a curse. Chris unpacked the law and what it means for God's people. And then we learned about the golden calf from Pastor Gary, and how the Israelites, while God was on the mountain with Moses, giving them the law, which, by the way, the first law is, you will have no other gods before me. While he was giving them this law, that, by the way, they should have known, they made a golden calf, worshiped it, called it Yahweh, and said, these be our gods that brought us out of Egypt. It's about as silly, I'm not going to say that because parents are going to get mad, but I was going to talk about, just make a correlation between, me giving some other guy the credit for all the things under the Christmas tree. No, I'm not going to spoil anybody's fun for tonight, but I almost did. But giving a pagan god the credit for what Yahweh did. That's what they did. And then we learned, you can grab my paper here. Guys, yeah, you got to understand I have a migraine headache right now that's so bad, but I'm pushing through it. So then we learned about the priests with John, and he taught us about the Levitical priesthood and how that relates to the Melchizedek priesthood, which, by the way, we're learning about that on Sunday mornings in our 11 o'clock series going through Hebrews. And tonight we're going to be looking at the star. And this might be something that not many of us are familiar with. We think of the star, when you think of the star, what do you think of? The Star of Bethlehem, right? The star that led the wise men to Jesus. That's what you think of when you think of a star that somehow has a correlation to Christ. And while I don't think that you're too far off here, it's not the star we're talking about, not necessarily. And we're going to look at this. So let's go to the Lord in prayer and pray that he blesses his word as it finds its way into open hearts. Father, we ask you again to help us to see the truths found herein, found in your word. Help these truths to change us and to mold us and to make us more like Christ. They all point to him. Help us to see that. Help us to glorify and magnify your name tonight. We ask this in Jesus' name, amen. So if you don't have to turn there, but just to recap, Numbers 13 is the chapter where we see God sending his spies into Canaan. And there they were at Kadesh, probably near Kadesh Barnea. And this was the easy route. This would have been the direct route, right? The more direct route. And they were there. And they sent 12 spies into the promised land to spy and to see what we have that we're going to be up against. Of course, if you remember the story, 10 of those spies came back and said, there's no way, there are too many of them, they're too big, and we can't beat these guys. But 2 of them came back and said, no, with God on our side, we can take these guys, right? Now, who were the 2 spies that said, we got this, we can take them? Any young people want to take a stab at that? Who were the name of the 2 spies? Joshua and Caleb. And I personally am convinced that Joshua is the name, it's actually the name Yeshua in grammar, and Yeshua is the Greek, or their way of pronouncing Jesus. And Jesus is the same word in Hebrew and the ancient languages as Yeshua. So Joshua led the people into the promised land, and Jesus leads us into his promises. You see, everything overlaps, everything tracks. All the Old Testament happenings have some kind of reflection in the new. In fact, they are shadows of the real realities that we find in the new covenant in Christ. So God sends his spies, and I believe that Joshua was a type of Christ, and Caleb was a type of the Holy Spirit. It says that he had a different kind of spirit than the others. 10 feared, 2 had courage. Numbers 14, the people side with the 10 spies, and as a result, God caused them to wander in the desert for an additional 40 years. In fact, they were spying out the land for 40 days, and God said, for every day that you are spying out the land will be another year you will spend in the desert. 40 years. They could have just walked right in, guys. They could have walked right into God's promises, knowing that God was going to fight for them. He would have done all the heavy lifting. All they would have had to come and do was the mop up after the fact. But they were thinking of it in terms of their own doing and their own accomplishment. And as a result, God said, you're not ready yet. So Numbers 14 is where they are given the additional 40 years to wander in the desert, and they had to turn around. It says they turned around and began to head back towards the Red Sea. They tried to go through the land of their cousins, the land of the Edomites, and the Edomites would not let them through. So they had to go even further south so that they can come up and come around over to where the Amorites, the Canaanite clan that lived on the east side of the Jordan River. They were not allowed to attack the Moabites and the Ammonites. But the Amorites were fair game. You know why they weren't allowed to attack the Edomites and the Amorites? Because they were their cousins through Ishmael and through Esau. And they had a promise given to them by God. But they had to go all the way around Edom because Edom wouldn't let them through and they weren't allowed to attack them. So they had to go down south all the way around, and they wandered like that in the desert in this holding pattern for 40 more years. 40 more years. Until finally, the time had come, and we see in Numbers chapter 20, Abner, Numbers chapter 20 is where they are, again, without water. So God has Moses do something different this time. Instead of strike the rock, what does God tell Moses to do? He tells Moses to speak to the rock. Isn't that interesting? The first time they needed water to come from this rock, and he said, strike the rock. And he did, and water came out. Water came from that rock. But the second time, he told Moses, don't strike the rock, speak to the rock. Now, why would that be? If Jesus is the rock, and from him comes forth living water, why is it the first time he was to be struck, and the second time he was to be spoken to? It's because there's never again a need for another sacrifice after Christ gave his life on the cross. That's the final, the once and for all sacrifice, and no longer does he ever again have to be struck. No longer does Christ ever again have to be smitten for our transgressions. And from that point on, all you have to do is speak to him, and he will hear you. But Moses didn't listen, did he? He didn't listen. He struck the rock. It says he struck it twice. I think most people think because he struck it the first time, nothing happened. So then he hauls off and swings and hits it again with his staff, and then sure enough, water comes out. But then God says, Moses, you disobeyed my command, and you struck the rock instead of speaking to it. And as a result, you are not going into the promised land. You will die in the desert. You will die on this side of the Jordan. That was his punishment for striking the rock, because he destroyed the picture that God was trying to paint through these commands. He destroyed the image. But we know the image was Moses didn't follow the command. And so he strikes the rock at Meribah after God told him to speak to it. In Numbers 21, the Israelites defeat the Amorites. This defeat struck fear into the hearts of the Moabites. Again, the Moabites were a tribe south of the Amorites. And when they saw the Israelites come in with their armies and strike down the Amorites, they killed Bashan the king and Og the king, these kings of the Amorites. It struck fear into the hearts of all the neighboring civilizations around there. So there they were, and they just defeated the Amorites. And it's important to make a distinction between the Amorites and the Ammonites. It's a lot of ites, I get it. But the Amorites were Canaanites. The Ammonites were the descendants of Lot. And they were told to be left alone by Moses, by Aaron and all the armies of Israel, because they were cousins. They were actually Hebrew people. They just weren't of the promise of the covenant of Abraham, but they had some promises of God. So they were told, the Ammonites were told, don't touch them, but the Amorites, the Canaanites, they're fair game. And it's funny that if you look at a map today, what's the capital of Jordan? Ammon. In the exact same place where the Ammonites were dwelling that far back in history. The Ammonites still, their descendants in some way, shape, or form, the tradition carries on, and the Ammonites were never wiped off the face of the earth because they were from the loins of Lot. So Numbers 21, we see them defeat the Amorites, and this defeat struck fear in the hearts of the Moabites. So that is where we get into Numbers chapter 22. That was all backstory, and I wanted you to get all that just so you know where we're at. Look at Numbers 22. And I want to read this because this is a text of scripture that a lot of people never get to, or they skip because they think of Numbers as being a boring book, and it is not. But let's look at Numbers 22, verse 1. It says, "Then the children of Israel moved and camped in the plains of Moab on the side of the Jordan across from Jericho." They camped in the plains of Moab across from Jericho. Jericho was this walled city in this massive plain, and it's kind of interesting geography. It's like hundreds of feet below sea level, actually. But it's this fertile plain in the Jordan River, along the Jordan River, and Jericho was on the west side of the Jordan in the Levant, in the promised land. But then on the other side of the Jordan River was another city, and we'll get into that in a minute. But they had conquered the Ammonites. They had taken that plain, and no one else could stop them at this point. So they took the best land there on the east side of the Jordan River, and that's where they set up camp. They actually most likely, it's almost certain that they set up their camp with the tabernacle on top of an ancient tell, an ancient city called Tel El Hammam. That ancient city is now there still to this day. It's a mound, but there's layers of civilizations below it, including one called Shittim. And that's where they set up their camp, at Shittim, and all the tents of the Israelites, like we've been camping in tents, many of us, all the tents of the Israelites were set up in the grass plain all around this tell, which is a mound of an ancient city called Shittim. And it was called Shittim, but then before it was called Shittim, do you know what that city was called? Sodom. I am convinced that is the ruins of Sodom is actually what became, when they rebuilt it, as Shittim. And I can make that case, but not today. But that is where they were setting up camp after they had conquered and pushed out the people that lived there. 450 years earlier, this is where Abraham and this is where Lot had gone and was tempted with the sins of Sodom. Look at verse 2. Now Balak, the son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. And Moab was exceedingly afraid of the people because they were many. And Moab was sick with dread because of the children of Israel. They were sick with dread, and Balak was their king. Moab said to the elders, verse 4, elders of Midian, now this company will lick up everything around us, as an ox licks up grass of the field. And Balak, the son of Zippor, was king of the Moabites at that time. So remember, Balak is the king of the Moabites. Put a pin in that. He sent messengers to Balaam, the son of Beor, at Pethor. Now, Balaam is this very mysterious character, and we don't know a whole lot about him, but we can derive from what we have in Scripture that he was a diviner. He was a very well-known man of divination, right? He had contact with the other side, and if you guys don't understand how this works, Yahweh is the creator of all things, including all principalities and powers. But there are other principalities and powers, and we are told as the people of Yahweh to not mess with that. Don't even go there. Don't even touch that, because there is real power in divination. There's real things happening in all of that. Yahweh is our God, and we are to have no other gods beside him, because all other gods are nothing more than rebellious demons who have rebelled against God and have been cast out of heaven. But Balaam was sort of a psychic, if you will. But more than a psychic, he was, maybe you could think of him as a wizard, right? He was involved in high-level witchcraft, and he could do spells and conjure demons and do all kinds of wonderful works to the point where he was famous at the time. He was so famous that when Balak, the king of the Moabites, needed something to stop these Israelites, he thought, we need to get Balaam down here. Do you guys know how far away Balaam was? He was like way over at the Euphrates. He was hundreds of miles away. This was a famous diviner at the time. And they called him. And guys, he wasn't cheap. They called him. And he sent messengers. Look what it says. He sent messengers to Balaam, the son of Beor, at Pethor, which is near the river, in the land of the sons of his people, to call him, saying, look, now the river we believe is the Euphrates, so this is far away from where they were. To call him, saying, look, a people has come from Egypt. See, they've covered the face of the earth and are settling next to me. Therefore, please come at once. Curse this people, for they are too mighty for me. Perhaps I shall be able to defeat them and drive them out of the land. For I know that he whom you bless is blessed, and he whom you curse is cursed. So he sent this letter to Balaam with the hand of messengers saying, dude, we got some people coming in from Egypt, and they are like cockroaches just everywhere. They're multiplying and spreading, and we can't stop them. They just defeated the Amorites, and they're too strong for us. And they're going to devour us soon. So please, we can't beat them militarily, but maybe you can come and cast a spell on them. Maybe you can come and curse them, and then we'll be able to defeat them. Right? That's how famous this Balaam was. That they thought, hey, Balaam can help. They brought him, tried to bring him down. But look at verse 7. So the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian departed with the diviner's fee in their hands. And they came to Balaam and spoke to him the words of Balak, the king of Moab, and said to him, lodge here, and he said to them, lodge here tonight, and I will bring back word to you as Yahweh speaks to me. It's interesting, he says, as Yahweh speaks to me. So here he is, he's going to actually be in contact with Yahweh here, which means that apparently he might have been polytheistic, but he recognized the existence of the Almighty God. I will tell you what Yahweh speaks to me. In fact, we'll get into what I think all that means shortly. The princes of Moab stayed with Balaam. And then God came to Balaam and said, who are these men with you? Verse 10, so Balaam said to God, Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, sent me, saying, look, a people has come out of Egypt, and they cover the face of the earth. Come now, curse them for me. Perhaps I will be able to overpower them and drive them out. And God said to Balaam, you shall not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they are blessed. So Balaam rose in the morning and said to the prince of Balak, go back to the land, for Yahweh has refused to give me permission to go with you. And the princes of Moab rose and went to Balak and said, so they went all the way back home at this point. And they said to Balak, he refuses to come with us. He won't come. Then Balak sent more princes, more numerous and more honorable, and maybe even more money, right? Who knows? And they came to Balaam and said to him, thus says Balak, the son of Zippor, please let nothing hinder you from coming to me, for I will certainly honor you greatly, and I will do whatever you say to me. Therefore, please come, curse this people for me. And then Balaam answered and said to the servants of Balak, though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not go beyond the word of Yahweh, my God. Isn't that interesting? He's saying that Yahweh is his God here. Isn't that interesting? There's a point to this. I cannot go beyond the word of Yahweh, my God, to do less or more. Now, therefore, please, you also stay here tonight, that I may know what more the Lord, Yahweh, will say to me. And God came to Balaam at night and said, if the men come to call you, rise and go with them, but only the word which I speak to you, that you shall do. Only the word that I speak to you, that you shall do. Now, how many of you are convinced at this point that Balaam is such an honorable, faithful servant of the Most High God that that is exactly what he was willing to do now that he has this pass from God to go down into Canaan land and curse these people? God says, but don't curse them. How many of you are convinced that in his heart he was fully willing to surrender to that, even though the fee had gone so high and they were willing to pay him so much to curse these people? But he's like, you know what? I'm going to go, but I don't care about the money. I'm going to say whatever the Lord wants me to say, even if it's not a curse. No, God knows his heart. God knows the motivation behind why he's doing what he's doing. He said, you can go, but look at this. You can go with them, but only the word, verse 20, that I speak to you, that you shall say. So Balaam arose in the morning, saddled his donkey, and went with the princes of Moab. Now think, we don't know what his heart is. We don't know what his motivation is right now. He might be thinking, I'm going to go and I'm just going to go ahead and curse him. Then God's anger was aroused because he went. Isn't that interesting? God said, you can go. He said, go ahead. And then the very next verse is, so he saddled his donkey and he went. And then it says, God's anger was aroused because he went. Now, how does that make sense, if not to say that his heart's motive was not in obedience to the Lord? It was one of those things where, I'm not going to actually do the thing that I know is wrong, but I'm just going to go and check it out. But in your heart, you are not fully surrendered to God. And then when you get there and you see all the riches they're offering you, your heart is in a place where you will bend to that pressure and you will do what you know is wrong. I believe that's where he was. God's anger was aroused because he went, and the angel of the Lord, guys, the angel of the Lord, whenever you see that phrase, I think just about whenever you see the angel of Yahweh, that is actually God in human flesh, standing as a man on the earth. The angel of the Lord, angel of Yahweh, you might see an angel of Yahweh, but this says the angel, capital A, angel of Yahweh, took his stand in the way as an adversary against him. He was riding on his donkey, and his two servants were with him. Now the donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his sword drawn in his hand, and the donkey turned aside out of the way and went into the field. So Balaam struck the donkey and to turn her back onto the road. Then the angel of the Lord stood in a narrow path between the vineyards with a wall on one side and a wall on the other side. He was through a narrow path, and the angel was standing there. And when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she pushed herself against the wall and crushed Balaam's foot against the wall. So he struck her again. Then the angel of the Lord went further and stood in a narrow place where there was no way to turn either to the right or left. And when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she laid down under Balaam. So Balaam's anger was aroused, and he struck the donkey with his staff again. Then Yahweh opened the mouth of the donkey. Now, kids, check this out. I love this part because you have a talking donkey going on here, all right? You have a story here where this guy's donkey starts to talk to him. And what does the donkey say? Why are you hitting me? Well, I mean, that's a great question when you're being beat by your master. The donkey, his mouth is open, and she said to Balaam, "What have I done to you that you have struck me these 3 times?" And Balaam said to the donkey, hold on a second. I have to assume that this is summing up the scenario, okay? Because if my donkey, had I had one, started talking to me and said, "Hey, why are you hitting me?" I wouldn't just be like, "Well, now that you ask, it's because you keep acting like a dummy and you keep knocking my foot." Stop. No. There's going to be some interim conversation like, did this donkey just talk to me? Did this donkey just utter words? Donkey, did you just say words? I mean, you have to think. I'm thinking like, Shrek or something like that. Is this donkey talking to me right now? And the donkey's like, "Yeah, I'm talking to you." But donkeys can't talk. And again, I don't know how this all works. Maybe Balaam was such an incredible seer and a prophet that he had communication with the animals. I highly doubt that, but I'm just saying, this story gets me because I don't understand what is going on here. I think this is one of the only times in the Bible where you have an animal talking to someone. And again, I believe that this happened because Jesus believed that this happened, and Jesus came back from the dead. So if the guy who came back from the dead in his own strength believes that a donkey talked to Balaam, I believe a donkey talked to Balaam. Okay? Maybe it's too simplistic, but that's where I'm at. But finally, they decided to break down and have this conversation. Balaam said to the donkey, Because you have abused me, I wish there was a sword in my hand, for now I would kill you. It's like, no, man, don't kill the talking donkey. This is going to, this thing is a, golden goose. It can, take it to the county fair and, it's a talking donkey. You don't kill a talking donkey. But he's like, I could kill you. In verse 30, it says, so the donkey said to Balaam, am I not your donkey on which you have ridden ever since I became yours to this day? Was I ever disposed to do this to you? And he said, no. He's like, have I ever treated you this way before? Maybe there's a reason I'm doing this, bro. Right? So by the way, guys, this donkey seemed to have a memory of their whole time together as master and donkey. So maybe don't kick the cat. I don't know. I'm just saying. I don't know how this works, but the Yahweh opened Balaam's eyes, and then he saw the angel of the Lord, verse 31, standing in the way with his sword drawn in his hand, and he bowed his head and fell flat on his face. And the angel of Yahweh said to him, why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? Behold, I've come out to stand against you because your way is perverse before me. You guys see that? He did not have good motives going on this trip. God told him directly, you will not go curse these people. Okay, fine, you can go, but you will not curse these people. Yet he went, I believe, fully intending to curse these people and take home the prize. Then the donkey saw me and turned aside from me these 3 times. If she had not turned aside from me, surely I would have also killed you by now and let her live. And Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, I have sinned, for I did not know you stood in the way against me. Now therefore, if it displeases you, I will turn back. Let me just throw this out there, guys. In your personal life, you might see things that you're up against that don't make any sense to you. And a lot of times it might seem like a hindrance. It might seem like something is getting in the way of what you think you should be doing with your life, when in fact, what you can't see is that God is standing in the way of this thing that you're trying to do because he knows this is a terrible idea. And then so many of us get so eager to go and carry out our desires, even though it seems clearer and clearer that something is trying to stop me from doing this. That you start beating the donkey that's carrying you. So, you start getting angry and forcing this to happen when you should just realize that God is not pleased with what you're doing. Turn around and go home. I don't know if that is for anyone in here right now, but take it and put it where it belongs. He said, I have sinned, for I did not know that you stood in the way. It's like, oh man, if I would have known God was watching me this whole time, I wouldn't have done this. I wouldn't have had this evil motivation. But do you guys realize that he is watching you at all times? Balaam learned this the hard way. Now therefore, if it displeases you, I will turn back. Then the angel of the Lord said to Balaam, go with the men, but only the word that I speak to you, that will you speak. So Balaam went with the princes of Balak. Now when Balak had heard that Balaam was coming, he went out to meet him at the city of Moab, which is on the border of Arnon, the boundary of the territory. Then Balak said to Balaam, did I not earnestly send you, calling for you? Why did you not come to me? Am I not able to honor you? And Balaam said, look, I have come to you. Now have I any power at all to say anything? The word that God puts in my mouth, that I must speak. So Balaam went with Balak, and they came to Kirjath Huzoth. Then Balak offered oxen and sheep, and he sent them to Balaam and to the princes who were with him. So it was the next day that Balak took Balaam and brought him up. So Balak took Balaam and brought him up to the high place of Baal, that from there he might observe the extent of the number. And then Numbers 23:1 says, then Balaam said to Balak, build 7 altars for me and prepare for me 7 bulls and 7 rams. And Balak did just as Balaam had spoken. Balak and Balaam offered a bull and a ram on each altar. Then Balaam said to Balak, stand by your burnt offerings and I will go Perhaps the Lord Yahweh will come to meet me, and whatever he shows me, I will tell you. So he went to a desolate height, and God met Balaam and said to him, I have prepared 7 altars, and I have offered each a bull and a ram, but the Lord put a word in Balaam's mouth and said, return to Balak, and thus you shall speak. So he returned to him, and he was standing by the burnt offering, he and the princes of Moab, and he took up his oracle and said, Balak, king of Moab, has brought me from Aram, from the mountains of the east. Come, curse Jacob for me, and come, denounce Israel. How shall I curse what God has not cursed? How shall I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced? Now, he then goes on to say oracle number 1. Oracle number 1. His proclamation number 1. And here it is. He's supposed to curse Israel, yet here's what he says. From the top of the rocks I see him. From the hills I behold him. A people dwelling alone, not reckoning itself among the nations. Who can count the dust of Jacob or number forth of Israel? Let me die the death of the righteous, and let my end be like his. Referring to Israel, saying, what a righteous man. May I die the death of the righteous, and let my end be like his. That's not a curse, that's a blessing. And it goes on, and he then, let me find my place here. Maybe. There it is. So he said he built 7 altars, and then instead of cursing Israel, Balaam blessed Israel. And you have to think this made Balak very angry, because Balaam's blessings and curses were apparently very weighty and they had power, and he blessed Israel. And he goes on, Balak, king of Moab, was angry with him and said, I brought you here, I hired you to do a thing, and you're not doing the thing I told you to do. And then it says then that they went up to the top of another mountain. They went down through the valley, went up to the top of another. We actually know where these mountains are. And then he goes and they sacrifice 7 more cows on 7 more altars. And then Balaam says to Balak, I will go and I will see what the Lord has for me to say. And then oracle number 2. He comes back with this blessing rather than a curse. He has not observed iniquity in Jacob, nor has he seen wickedness in Israel. The Lord his God is with him. His God is anthropomorphizing Israel as a single man. The Lord his God is with him. The shout of a king is among them. God brings them out of Egypt. He has strength like a wild ox. For there is no sorcery against Jacob, nor any divination against Israel. It now must be said of Jacob and of Israel, oh, what God has done. Look, a people rises like a lioness and lifts itself up like a lion. It shall not lie down, even until it devours the prey and drinks the blood of the slain. Man, this is not a curse. He blessed Israel. I love this phrase, the Lord is not angry with him. He has not observed iniquity in Jacob, nor has he seen wickedness in Israel. How does he not observe iniquity in Jacob? Jacob referring to the Israelites. He has not seen wickedness in Israel. How is that possible? For 40 years now, they have done nothing but rebel against God, time after time after time. How is it that God does not see wickedness in Israel? John talked about that last night. Because when God forgives sin, that sin is as far as the east is from the west. And the priest would offer those sacrifices and appease the wrath of God, and that sin was forgiven temporarily, but Christ would come and make that permanent. And then finally he says, Balaam, you did it again. I told you to curse Israel, and there you are blessing them. Let's go try this a 3rd time. So they go up another peak to another mountain. And they say, offer 7 more sacrifices so that maybe Yahweh will hear us and he will curse Israel. Oracle number 3 was this: How lovely are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings. If you guys think he's on the top of this mountain, the third mountain, this mountain here, he can see straight down the valley into the camp of the Israelites. He can see Tel El Hammam, which was Shittim, with the temple, the tabernacle perched on top of it, and the tents spread around the plain. He could see this, and he says this, looking out over the tents of the Israelites: How lovely are your tents, O Israel, O Jacob, your dwellings, like valleys that stretch out, like gardens by the riverside, like aloes planted by the Lord, like cedars beside the water. He shall pour water from his buckets, and his seed shall be in many waters. His kings shall be higher than Agag, and his kingdom shall be exalted. God brings him out of Egypt. He has strength like a wild ox. He has consumed the nations, his enemies. He shall break their bones and pierce them with his arrows. He bows down, he lies down as a lion who shall rouse him. Blessed is he who blesses you, and cursed is he who curses you. And Balak, the king of Moab, is angry now beyond description. He's apoplectic. And he begins to scold Balaam, saying, I brought you here to curse them, and you have blessed them 3 times. And he says, because of this, you're not getting paid. I'm not going to bring you down here to do a job, and then you come and you don't do the job. I'm not paying you anything. So then Balaam, he's like, okay, well then I'll do this 4th blessing for free. You won't pay me to do exactly what I said I was going to do, which is do what God told me to do? Well then, here's one for you for free. Oracle number 4. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. It shall crush the forehead of Moab and break down all the sons of Sheth. Edom shall be disposed. Seir also, his enemies, shall be dispossessed. Israel is doing valiantly, and one from Jacob shall exercise dominion and destroy the survivors of the cities. This one, he turned the blessing. He didn't just bless Israel. He then blessed them with a blessing that was also doubling as a curse on Balak. Do you guys catch what he just did? While blessing Israel, he cursed Edom. He cursed Moab. He cursed Balak. It says, a star shall come from Jacob, a scepter shall rise out of Israel. It will crush the forehead of Moab and break down all the sons of Sheth. Edom shall be dispossessed. Seir also, his enemies shall be dispossessed. Israel is doing valiantly. And it says, one shall come from Israel that will crush the Edomites and the Moabites and all the other ites that will not bow their knee to him. Who is that man that he just prophesied? That is Yeshua. And we see that happening actually here in the few chapters when Joshua leads the people through the Jordan River and they go up and they begin to crush all the Canaanites, one city after another. But we know that the prophecy has not been fulfilled yet because Edom has not been crushed. Do you guys know who Edom is today? Islam. We know that this prophecy hasn't been fulfilled yet because Christ has not come and crushed the heads of all those who will not bow their knee to him and his kingship. Christ, Yeshua, will come back and he will lead his people into the full, realized, promised land that he said he was going to bring about. That what they did back here at this time period in Numbers and Deuteronomy and Joshua, this was only a type and a shadow of what Christ, Yeshua, is going to do for his people when he returns. The star, remember the Magi who came from the out far east, probably maybe even a very similar area from Balaam? About 1,500 years later, there were some Magi, probably in a very similar type of profession to Balaam. Magi, magicians, right? That's where we get that word. And these Magi were observers of the stars, and they saw something in the stars one night, and they said, that's significant. And they deduced from the way the stars were behaving that a king had been born in Israel. So they saddled up their donkeys and they began traveling from probably the same area that Balaam had traveled from 1,500 years earlier. And they traveled with gifts. Rather than coming in order to be paid, they came expecting to offer tribute to the king that one of their own prophesied 1,500 years earlier. They came with gold and frankincense and myrrh. There was more than 3 Magi, by the way. There were simply 3 gifts that they brought. But they came with gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and they traveled all the way from probably the same region as Balaam 1,500 years earlier, and they went and they placed those gifts before the newborn Messiah, who at that point was probably not a newborn, and they were no longer in a... anyways, we're not going to get into that right now. But, and actually, I'm pretty convinced of the Rick Larson's depiction or telling of the astrological events that pointed to what the star probably was that led them to Bethlehem. If you want to look up Rick Larson, The Star of Bethlehem, and just watch the document, it's phenomenal. I believe that he's onto something there. But they followed the star to the Messiah who had been born not long before this. And while Jesus almost certainly was not born on December 25th, if Rick Larson's explanation of this star is correct, that is exactly when that star came to a full retrograde stop over the city of Bethlehem. And then December 25th would have been when they arrived with gold and frankincense and myrrh and offered them as gifts to Jesus. Look it up. It's very fascinating, and it could be wrong, but I think that he might be onto something there. But regardless, these Magi recognized something about this star, and scholars seem to unanimously agree that they were paying close attention to an oracle given by a seer from well over 1,000 years earlier, prophesying, a powerful seer named Balaam, who prophesied that from Israel would come forth one who would conquer the world. And that's what they believed. And this imagery of a star in Balaam's prophecy is often linked to this star that the Magi in Matthew 2, he was born in Bethlehem of Judea. The scepter, also in this prophecy, there was a scepter in the hand of this king. A star, guys, a star in pagan, ancient Near East pagan mythology always represented a deity. Okay? So when Balaam saw a star come out of Israel, he was saying a deity is going to come and he will be holding a scepter. He's saying the deity of the Israelite people is going to come to earth and he will hold a scepter, which means the God of the Israelites is going to come down and become a king. That is what Balaam prophesied in this fourth oracle. And that's exactly what happened when Christ came. And that's exactly what will happen in completion when he returns the second time not to die for our sins, but to conquer the entire world, as he said that he would. But before we're done, let's look at Numbers 31, and we are almost done. So while this prophecy that Balaam prophesied was all about Jesus, and he nailed it, he absolutely called it. And it says that he was a worshiper of Yahweh. But you know what he also was? He was also a worshiper of whatever other god was convenient. He was also a worshiper of whatever paid the most, which many scholars believe is the doctrine of the Nicolaitans. Have you heard of the doctrine of the Nicolaitans? It's basically pragmatic Christianity. Syncretistic Christianity. Syncretism is when you take one thing that's kind of the core, but then you take all sorts of other things that have nothing to do with that one thing and then bring them in and attach them to it, making a new thing that is an aberration of the actual original thing. And that's what many people believe the Nicolaitan doctrine is, because of convenience or profit or whatever your motivation might be. While you claim to be worshiping the true and living God, you're actually adding things to it out of convenience or personal profit, personal gain, which is where we get to Numbers 31, 1 through 16. You guys see, he just really ticked off the Edomites, didn't he? He just flat out said, yeah, a prophet's going to come, a king is going to come, their star, their God is going to come down to earth, and he's going to take up the scepter, and he's going to crush your heads. And can you imagine, if you read the whole chapter, it says Balak was ticked. He was really mad. He's like, you little punk, I'm going to send you back to where you came from in pieces. Now, I'm making all that up, but he was mad. And we don't know exactly what happened, but we do know in the very next chapter, you know what happened? It says that the Edomites and the Moabites sent women. They couldn't defeat Israel with a sword, so they sent women into the camp of the Israelites. And it says the Israelites began to commit fornication and commit adultery and commit harlotry with the women of the Edomites and the Moabites, until finally it got so bad in it got out of control. And there was this incredible story about one of the Edomite, Moabite women and an Israelite man, and it says that they were misbehaving like in the temple door, the tabernacle door. And then was it Jephunah? Is that his name? Jephunah was so outraged at what they were doing to desecrate the tabernacle of Yahweh that he took a spear when he saw them dancing, whatever they were doing, and he was so angry there's kids. He was so angry that he ran and he put a spear through them both. And God blessed him. You think that's cruel and harsh. It was also war. It was an act of war. You guys have these things. Everybody, it seems like they got them in their pockets. You know, it's an act of war to demoralize a society so they become weak and passive so that they can be conquered without a fight. That is the tactic of the Moabites. They couldn't defeat Israel with military, so they defeated them with their women. They tried to. And I see that happening to our young men today. I see that happening today. Numbers 31, and we know that Balaam actually was the one that taught them how to do that. He said, "Hey guys, you can't defeat them militarily, and I can't curse them. I can't. But I really want to get paid. I came all the way down here. What if I told you how you can defeat the Israelites?" Look at Numbers 31. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Avenge the people of Israel on the Midianites. Afterwards you shall be gathered to your people." So Moses spoke to the people, saying, "Arm men among you for war, that they may go against the Midianites to execute the Lord's vengeance on the Midianites." You shall send 1,000 from each tribe of Israel to the war. There were provided out of the 1,000 of Israel 1,000 from each tribe, 12,000 armed for war. And Moses sent them to the war, 1,000 from each tribe, with Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the priest, with the vessels of the sanctuary and the trumpets for the alarms in his hand. They warred against Midian as the Lord commanded Moses, and killed every male. They killed the kings of the Midianites, and with the rest of their slain, Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, Reba, 5 kings of the Midianites. And they also killed Balaam, the son of Beor, with the sword. He hung around, guys. He hung around, and he got himself killed because of his betrayal of the people of God. And the people of Israel, check this out, took captive among the women of Midian and their little ones, and they took as plunder all the cattle, their flocks, and their goods, and the cities and the places where they lived, and all their encampments they burned with fire, and took all the spoil and all the plunder, both of man and of beast. They brought the captives and the plunder and the spoil to Moses and Eleazar the priest, and to the congregation of the people of Israel at the camp of the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho. Moses and Eleazar the priest and all the chiefs of the congregation went to meet them outside the camp. And Moses was angry with the officers of the army, the commanders of thousands and the commanders of hundreds who had come from the service in the war. Moses said to them, "Have you let all the women live?" You guys remember, these women were combatants. He let them live. He let them live. And you think, women were combatants? They were, because these were the women that were trained to seduce the men of Israel. And they kept them. They brought them back. And Moses says, "What are you doing? These women are just as guilty as the men that sent them. Have you let all the women live? Behold, these, on Balaam's advice, caused the people of Israel to act treacherously against the Lord in the incident of Peor. And so the plague came among the congregation of the Lord." You can go back to Numbers 30 or 23 and read about that plague. But it says here, on Balaam's advice, he couldn't curse the Israelites. So he taught the Edomites, the Moabites, how to take them down, which was to send in lewd women to destroy the men. That's where we're at, guys. As a culture, that's where we are at. And I will tell you this, all of the evil forces that put that trash within a few finger presses of all the men, and I'm saying women too, but men have a much bigger problem with all that than women do. The people who create these websites that allow lewdness to be so easily accessed by all of us, those entities, those individuals are trying to destroy Western civilization. It's not a byproduct of something that they're trying to do for profit. It is their goal. Okay? It is their actual main goal is to destroy Western civilization, which, by the way, Western civilization could easily be substituted with Christian civilization. They can't take us down because we're blessed by God. They can't take us down because we have Christ as our King. So what do? They send us women and make them so easy to access. And it destroys the warriors among us. It makes us ineffective. But God is looking for what's the guy's name again? Phineas, Ferb? Come on. The guy with the spear? Jephthah. I was close. Whatever his name is, the guy who came in and said, "Not happening on my watch." He's looking for some young men who have that spirit saying, I am not going to tolerate this. I'm not saying to take a spear and kill anybody. But in the same way they were physically fighting with warfare in the old covenant, now we're spiritually fighting in the new covenant. We need some spiritual warriors who are willing to say, not happening on my watch. Not happening on my watch. And only then will the plague be evaded. Because God sent the plague and began killing all the people as they were committing these adulteries. And finally, when that guy, whatever his name is, he ended it. And we need some people who are spiritual warriors who are willing to end this. So, while Balaam had some connection with the true and living God, like so many of us do, what he tried to do was he tried to have his cake and eat it too. He tried to have a relationship with God and a relationship with the world. He had tried to mix the two. And as a result, he died there in war at the hands of God's people. So let me ask you this. Are you doing that? Are you bringing in syncretistic, pagan things that have nothing to do with Christianity? But as a result of all this, the Israelites were able to conquer all their enemies. And the very next thing we see, of course, Deuteronomy is the final sermon that Moses preached to the people of Israel before he died, and his body was taken by the Lord and buried at a place where no one knows, somewhere on Mount Pisgah, which, by the way, that's the second place that Balaam prophesied from, that mountain peak. And his body was hid, and then Joshua, the son of Nun, the only person in the Bible that had no father or mother. He was the son of Nun. I'm sorry, I'll stop. And he then was able to lead the people into the promised land because they finally got their act together. And of course, it wasn't just smooth sailing from that point. They then had to go and conquer city by city. Jericho was a cakewalk because they trusted God, and then they got cocky, and then Ai was after that, and they got their butts kicked. But ultimately, conquered Ai after learning that lesson. So my challenge to all of us as we're finishing up this Festival of Tents, that is supposed to be a reminder of how we were completely reliant on God when they had nothing but a canvas separating them from the wild. Nothing but a canvas tent protecting them from the elements. And they had to rely on God to give them water from rocks and manna from heaven. And in the same way, we now have to rely on God to be the living water and to be the bread of life. So let us all remember this and let it change us as we have the worship team come back up to do one final song. And then once we're done with that, we'll close the service with Brother Tony. Would you close us in prayer when we're done singing? Let's all stand together and